We're in Egypt, and we're headed up first to Alexandria. Now, Alexandria, of course, is named after Alexander the Great, who had the city laid out. After that, he went off to war to defeat the Persians. Incidentally, that picture of him that's so famous, his head is cocked a little bit, and it's thought that maybe he was deaf in one ear, and that's why his head is cocked that way. In any event, after a number of battles and wars throughout Asia, he comes back to Babylon, and he dies there at a very young age. His body is eventually transported back to Egypt. But that's a very interesting and complicated story all by itself.
This is the story behind Alexander's body and his tomb. Almost immediately after Alexander's death, chaos erupted, as the Macedonians quickly began arguing over the fate of the empire, leaving his body unattended for many days in the Babylonian heat. Legend has it that upon returning to the corpse, to everyone's amazement, they found it in pristine condition, untouched by decay. Perdiccas, the highest-ranking commander in Babylon, then had Alexander's body embalmed and placed in a golden coffin. For the next 2 years, Alexander's body remained in Babylon, as Perdiccas and his followers oversaw the construction of a funeral carriage unlike any other the world had seen. The carriage was designed to resemble a great temple. It had beautiful Ionic columns, encircled by paintings depicting Alexander and his army, and was covered with gold. It was to be pulled by 64 mules, each bearing a golden crown and bell. Upon its completion, Perdiccas ordered that Alexander's body was to be escorted home to Aigai in Macedonia, the traditional resting place of the Macedonian kings. Yet the plan went horribly wrong. The governor of Egypt, Ptolemy, was aware of the great wealth and potential of his domain, and soon grew ambitious, eager to get rid of Perdiccas' control. He believed he might achieve this by taking possession of Alexander's body, as it was a superhuman talisman representing authority and legitimacy in this new post-Alexander world. Whoever controlled the body held great sway. Ptolemy was not deterred by Perdiccas' precautions to keep the body, but he needed a daring plan. In 321 BC, Alexander's elaborate funeral cart left Babylon for Macedonia. Yet as the procession was making its way through Syria, Ptolemy made his move, bribing the escort, seizing the body, and diverting it to Egypt, where he had it housed in Memphis, the traditional Egyptian capital. Perdiccas was furious, as his authority as regent had been severely tarnished. It was the opposite for Ptolemy, as Alexander's soldiers came from far and wide to swell the ranks of his army. Perdiccas immediately marched on Egypt with his army, his main aim to regain control of the body and restore his authority. Ptolemy emerged victorious, and Perdiccas was murdered. Alexander's body was now securely in Ptolemy's possession. He quickly began proclaiming the link between himself and Alexander, becoming the first of the Diadochi to put Alexander's image on his coinage, and emphasizing that he was a favorite of Alexander in his account of the conquest of Asia. Ptolemy also cultivated a local legend of Alexander. Rather than being the son of Philip of Macedon, Egyptian tales soon became widespread that Alexander was the son of the last Egyptian pharaoh, Nectanebo II. In 343 BC, the Persians had deposed Nectanebo, who had then died in exile. His pre-made sarcophagus in Memphis had therefore remained empty. It is likely Ptolemy had first placed Alexander in this empty coffin, and it was from there that this fabulous story took root. A pharaoh of Egypt could only be legitimate if he was related to his predecessor, so this tale helped portray Alexander as Nectanebo's rightful heir. It also established a connection between the Macedonian and Egyptian dynasties, a connection that only helped Ptolemy's cause. At the same time, Ptolemy began spreading the rumour that he was in fact an illegitimate son of Philip II, and thus the half-brother of Alexander. Both stories spread rapidly and helped Ptolemy secure his rule in Egypt, thanks in good measure to his clever use of Alexander's body. Following the climactic Battle of Ipsus in 301 BC, Ptolemy had Alexander's body moved to the centre of his new capital at Alexandria and placed in a new elaborate tomb. The city had been founded by Alexander back in 331 BC, but had only recently been completed. Desiring to further emphasize this link, Ptolemy IV Philopator placed Alexander's body in a new royal burial complex in circa 215 BC. It soon became known as the Soma, or the body, named after its main exhibit. This new mausoleum was almost certainly visually majestic, perhaps inspired by the famed tomb of Mausolus at Halicarnassus. The complex may also have been circular, in its turn possibly inspiring the great tombs of the Roman emperors Augustus and Hadrian. Inside the enclosure, Alexander's body was placed in an underground chamber along with remains of the Ptolemies, once again emphasizing the closest possible link between the Ptolemies and Alexander. The Soma soon became an iconic feature of Alexandria. From far and wide, visitors would journey to Alexander's city and see his marvelous tomb. It was a place of pagan pilgrimage.
So how was it that Alexander the Great died at such a young age? Well, nobody knows for sure, but there is an interesting story that he and his friends were out riding one day, and a flock of birds flew over, and in mid-flight they all fell to the earth, dead. Now Alexander the Great was intellectually curious, so he went over to examine the birds, and he may have died, or at least gotten sick, as a result of bird flu. But it is possible that Alexander didn't die from the bird flu. Maybe he just got sick. Now his doctors were treating him with some medicine called hellebore. All hellebore plants are toxic. Hellebore poisoning is rare, but it does occur. Hellebore plants are usually left alone by animals such as deer and rabbits due to the fact that the leaves of the plant produce poisonous alkaloids, making them distasteful to the animals. It was first used in the First Sacred War at the start of the 6th century BC to poison the water supply of the city of Kira, a Greek city. The Greeks were always embarrassed by this use of poison to win a war. They always believed that you should face your enemy with a spear or a sword at close range and kill them that way. In any event, the use of hellebore at Kira may be part of the reason why we have rules against poison gas and other biological agents. Poisonings occur through ingestion or handling. The hellebore plant should not be ingested because poisoning cases are most severe. This is especially true when the hellebore are eaten in large quantities. Symptoms of ingestion include burning of the mouth and throat, salivation, vomiting, abdominal cramping, diarrhea, and nervous symptoms of various kinds. It's believed that hellebore was used, however, by Hippocrates. Despite its toxicity, hellebore was generally used by Greek and Roman doctors to treat paralysis, gout, and other diseases, and more particularly insanity. But even accidental over medication with hellebore may not have actually killed Alexander the Great. You remember that story that after Alexander died, they left his body out in the sun for days, and when they came back, everybody was really surprised that his body was uncorrupted. Well, of course, at that time, the belief was that that was because he was a god. But that may not necessarily be the reason. It's entirely possible that he was in a coma for a fairly long period of time, such that he appeared to be dead. But back to our story.
Now, after the Ptolemies had control of Alexander's body and they had buried him in Nectanebo II's crypt in Memphis, that was the last legitimate Egyptian pharaoh of the line. After his period, the Persians took over, and then, of course, when Alexander kicked the Persians out, he takes over as pharaoh. Well, the Ptolemies were very keen to associate that last native ruler with Alexander, and so they let rumors get about that Philip of Macedon wasn't really his father. It was this Egyptian pharaoh that was actually his father. And they put him in the crypt for Nectanebo because Nectanebo had never used it. He died outside the country.
That brings us to Alexander's first stop at Saqqara, which is the cemetery just beside the city of Memphis, which at one time was the capital of Egypt. Saqqara, incidentally, is where the step pyramid, the first pyramid, was built. You'll recall that Alexander the Great was at first put in the Serapeum at Saqqara. It's an underground complex of tunnels. The tunnels actually go on for miles. This is also one of the places where the mummified bulls were kept in tombs, just as though they were pharaohs or something. And of course, those tombs are extremely large. After all, they were bulls that were being mummified. From here, Alexander's body was eventually moved to Alexandria.
We're in Alexandria at Pompey's Pillar. That's Pompey's Pillar behind me. Actually, it has nothing to do with Pompey. A more correct term for this particular area is the Serapeum. We've talked about Serapeums before, and this particular Serapeum probably was a resting place for Alexander for a while. He was initially at the Serapeum in the Memphis area, brought up to Alexandria, probably put in this Serapeum, and then after that moved to the more permanent location on Soma.
By the way, we'll be talking about the Library of Alexandria later, but when the Library of Alexandria disintegrates, as it does eventually, the collection of books on the inside were distributed to various locations in Alexandria, and the Serapeum was one of the subsidiary libraries that developed. Now we know where the Serapeum is and was on both the old maps of Alexandria and the modern maps. The streets have changed a little bit, but not a great deal. And we also know roughly where Alexander's tomb was supposed to be in Alexandria. So now it's just a matter of comparing the old street map with the new street map in order to figure out where Alexander's body was likely to have been. That in black is the original street plan. That in red is a more modern street plan. Alexander's tomb should be someplace between the gate of the moon here and the gate of the sun.
And that location is probably on a road which at that time was called Soma, which means body. Now, we're not sure where on the road he might have been entombed. There's several possibilities. The odds-on favorite is that he was entombed in what is now a mosque, the Nabi Daniel Mosque.
This is a modern street map, and the Daniel Mosque, and that is Daniel from Daniel the Lion's Den, is located near the bottom of this map. Look for the blue arrow. We also know that it was somewhat close to the old Roman theater, and we know where the Roman theater is because it's been excavated. See the red arrow.
There is a possibility that that's true. In 1850, an archaeologist proposed that it was, but that area has never been excavated and may never be excavated.
This is the old Daniel Mosque. It's said to contain the body of the prophet Daniel, which is, of course, quite impossible because Daniel lived centuries before this place was built. Nevertheless, they really surprised me when they allowed us to go into the mosque, film in the mosque, and to go down into the crypt. This is said to be Daniel's tomb, but who knows who's actually buried here? But there is something very interesting. There's a tunnel behind me, and that tunnel is being excavated. It leads from the mosque out towards the street that I think is Soma Street. And if that's the case, and if this is the location for Alexander's body, all of the Ptolemies ought to be here, including Cleopatra. If this is the location, it means, among other things, that Julius Caesar was here in 48 BC paying his respects. It also means that this is the location where Queen Cleopatra took gold from the tomb to finance her war against the Roman Emperor Octavian, or at least he later became the Roman Emperor. Following Cleopatra's death, Augustus visited Alexander's burial place in Alexandria, and he was said to have placed flowers on the tomb and a golden diadem on the general's head. There's also an interesting little anecdote about that visit. When Augustus was visiting Alexander's tomb, he was asked if he'd like to see the Ptolemies, and he said, "I came to see a king, not a row of corpses." Other sources say that Caligula visited the tomb of Alexander and took his breastplate, and in 199 AD, Septimius Servus visited the tomb in Alexandria and ordered it be sealed in order to stop ongoing looting. In 215 AD, items from Alexander's tomb were relocated by Caracalla, who removed Alexander's tunic, his ring, and his belt, and some other items, and deposited them on the coffin. In 356, the city was inundated by a series of earthquakes and rising sea levels, and the waters of the Nile Delta caused Alexandria to sink as much as 12 feet since Alexander's time.
There is another possibility of another building on that same road, and that is St. Mark's Cathedral. Now, St. Mark's Cathedral is very interesting for a bunch of different reasons, one of which is it's the seat of the Coptic Patriarch, that is the Christian head of the Egyptian Church, just like the Pope is the head of the Catholic Church and the Greek Patriarch is the head of the Orthodox Church. This particular person was a co-equal individual. at about the same time that there's a crypt laid aside for St. Mark, who is said to have founded the church, Alexander's body goes missing. So the theory is that the body that was in that church was actually the body of Alexander and not St. Mark. And that would have been at about 329 or so. Now, a few hundred years later, 828 I think, some Venetians came to Alexandria and they stole the body of St. Mark, which may have been Alexander, and they took it back to St. Mark's Cathedral. So if you want to see Alexander the Great's body, it's entirely possible you could do that in Venice, Italy.
St. Mark's Cathedral is just down the street from the Nabi Daniel Mosque.
وانت في محطة الرمل ايه؟ مش دي المنشية ولا محطة الرمل؟ دي المنشية. ازاي يا عم؟ هو الواد اللي وصف لنا قال لنا فين؟ هي في واحدة هنا بقى، ما طلعتش هي؟ لسه هتلف كده وترجع عليها وتلف تاني. المهم نوصل. الشيء بتطلع هي بس. ما عارفها. مش عارف صراحة.
I'm in Alexandria, and behind me is St. Mark's. Now, St. Mark's is just down the street from the mosque that you just saw. And it is the alternate place where it is likely that Alexander the Great may have been entombed.
St. Mark's has been the seat of the Coptic Church, the Egyptian Christian Church, for a very long time. And this is a list inside the church of the patriarchs that are buried in the crypt there. And of course the oldest patriarch is St. Mark, the gospel writer. Now, when the Venetian merchants stole the body of St. Mark, according to the church here, they didn't quite get all of him. Specifically, they didn't get the skull. And so the church says that they still have the skull and always have. And then a few years ago, St. Mark's in Venice sent part of the body back to St. Mark's Cathedral in Alexandria for their reliquaries. This crypt down in the bottom of the basement of the church is said to be the resting place for not only St. Mark's skull, but all the other patriarchs of the Coptic Church.
Now, we're pretty sure that Alexander was in Alexandria, or at least nearby Alexandria, and the reason is because a fair number of people wrote about his tomb, and a number of Roman emperors visited it, including Julius Caesar, Caracalla, and several others. So we know that the tomb existed for a very, very long time. But we're not sure exactly where it was, whether it was in the church or the mosque or someplace else. Since then, the Department of Antiquities in Egypt has recorded something like 140 specific excavations by archaeologists looking for Alexander's tomb. There are lots of possibilities as to where it is. Alexander's body. Don't forget about it because we're going to be coming back to it. But Alexander's body isn't the only interesting thing in Alexandria.